I'm Randy CPU, past president of Friends of Freddy. I'm one of more than a few members of the group who made a living as a writer and editor, influenced, I dare say, by Walter R. Brooks, author of the Freddy the Pig series. The 26 Freddy books, first published between 1927 and 1958, feature the adventures of some extraordinary farm animals and their friends. The books are funny, suitable for kids and adults alike, and quietly teach lessons about the importance of community. In short, they're almost perfect. Almost. Those of us who've read and enjoyed them countless times have, on rare occasions, discovered a few, mistakes. They're pretty minor, and you could say only a pedant might notice. Okay, guilty as charged. Let's just move on, shall we? There's a single paragraph in Freddy and the Perilous Adventure that makes it clear that Brooks, or the copy editor, or the typesetter, or maybe all three, must have been having a very bad day. Take a minute to see if you can spot what's wrong here. The first problem is a simple typographical error we've probably all made, although in our case we can, and do, blame autocorrect, which didn't exist in Brooks's day. The second one would be hard to blame on autocorrect. Although some sources say it's a variant spelling of balloon, I think we can agree that's only because if you look enough places on the internet, you can find an argument in favor of almost anything. It's pretty clear that Brooks meant B-A-L-L-O-O-N. The third goof is probably the hardest to find. It's hidden within one of several series of words tied together with dashes. But look carefully at the words, and you'll see that none of those words appears to be hyphenated, except intrepid. Fortunately, the rest of Perilous Adventure is just about right. Well, except for the lack of a space between two words on page 197. Maybe it'd be okay if there was a character named Lethem, but there isn't. No worries, there are lots of great characters in the Freddy books. One perennial favorite is a cow known throughout the Barnyard and beyond for her common sense. That notable quality, in fact, led to her being elected the first Animal Republic's president. So you'd think that by the time Freddy and the Dragon was published in 1958 as the final book in the series, everyone would have figured out how to spell her name. But apparently not. Now, Mrs. Wiggins is a pretty central character. That's not the case for the man who runs the bank in Centerboro, who's notorious for having his glasses fall off whenever anybody mentions a sum in excess of $10. In Freddy and the Bean Home News, Mr. Weezer briefly becomes Mr. Weiser. No word on whether that development resulted in any lost spectacles. John Quincy Adams turns up in fewer of the Freddy books than Mr. Weiser, but he plays a big role in Freddy the Politician, where he's president of the First Animal Bank. The art here is the absolutely wonderful end paper for that book by the inimitable Kurt Vesey. The original illustration sold at auction in 2020 for more than $5,000. It turns out Vesey was capable of a hand-lettered typo. On the sign, Adams is missing the S. Oddly, there are a few instances where the typos appear only in the e-book versions of the stories, not in the original printed versions. Here's a paragraph from the e-book version of Freddy and the Baseball Team from Mars. There's something a little strange in the third sentence, don't you think? That's right, who's this character called Here? Well, in the printed version of the book, it's Herc, as in Hercules. Apparently, when the text was scanned to create the ebooks, the software attempted to fill in what seemed to be a nonsensical gap, perhaps in the same way that CD players have a limited ability to fill in blanks while reading a disc. The same thing may have happened here in the story of Freginald. What's a Durano? Well, in the printed book, it's dunno, which, by the way, might sound like an iffy word, but is recognized as a contraction by the Oxford English Dictionary. Let's stick with Freginald for another example. It's easy to miss this one, and miss it is exactly what Brooks or the copy editor or the typesetter did. The first sentence is lacking a little something. Bill wasn't sitting his horse. He was sitting on his horse. It's not always a word that's missing. See what's not present here but should be? Ah, those pesky punctuation marks are so easy to overlook. Sometimes all the words are there, but they're the wrong words. That's the case with the word before Old Dad in Freddy and Mr. Camphor. I think somebody forgot to, sweat the details, eh? Here's another wrong word example from Freddie and the Bean Home News. Surely brand new is lacking a D. Yeah, most likely. Based on my thorough, research, the only way brand new would make sense is if Charles had stuffed his speech with that type of grain, which I wouldn't put past him. There are some little inconsistencies in the books. Don't get me started on the confusing and sometimes conflicting clues to Centerborough's location or how many kids Charles and Henrietta have. As you'll see here, in Freddie Plays Football, the word gypsy is spelled G-I-P-S-Y throughout the book. It's a legitimate alternate spelling, but it's not the spelling used in The Clockwork Twin and Freddie and the Flying Saucer Plans. Thanks to a clever jingle by a company also known for its fleet of vehicles shaped like hot dogs, you probably know how to spell baloney. Go ahead and sing it to yourself. That's not how it's spelled in a couple of the Freddie books. No, in Freddie and the Perilous Adventure and Freddie Goes Camping, the spelling is B-O-L-O-N-E-Y. That's probably an improvement phonetically, and it's also an accepted alternate spelling. And so is B-A-L-O-N-E-Y, and that's what's used in Freddie the Pied Piper and the Story of Reginald. In Freddie the Cowboy, both spellings are used. That's enough baloney to make a pig very nervous. Here's another example of a rarely seen alternative spelling. So apparently if you don't want to use 6 letters like S-Q-U-I-S-H or even S-Q-U-U-S-H, you can save a tiny bit of ink with S-Q-U-S-H. Who knew? Here's another reference that's odd but sometimes considered acceptable. When we see 3D, we tend to think of it as three-dimensional. Of course, back in Freddie's day, there were only 2 dimensions. Most of what some would call grammatical errors in the books are the result of Brooks creating quotes based on how people and animals actually talk. Sometimes things still get a little clunky. In Freddie and the Baseball Team from Mars, us Martians should have been we Martians. And for whatever it's worth, I think Tush Villains was a happy accident, probably meant to be Tush Villians. When you have a complete sentence followed by another complete sentence, you can separate them with a colon if they're closely linked, or with a period and a new sentence anytime. What we have here is a comma splice, a 10-yard penalty at least. Speaking of distances, there are a few notably odd geographic notions in the books. Sure, we're supposed to suspend disbelief, and Brooks does a pretty good job of helping us to do that. We're all in on talking animals and pigs that can fly. But let's consider 2 assertions Brooks probably didn't think through. Here in Freddie Goes to the North Pole, Mrs. Wogus attempts to explain how Santa makes the most of time zones, but she gets the last part very wrong. Confusion over time zones doesn't explain this apparent boo-boo in Freddie and the Men from Mars. As you can see in the first sentence, Uncle Ben's atomic-powered station wagon somehow took 2 full days to get from Centerborough to Washington, D.C. Now, we're still not quite sure where Centerborough was, but we know it was reasonably near Syracuse, so let's use Syracuse as a proxy. It's 372 miles from Syracuse to Washington, D.C. Divide that 372 miles by 48 hours, and it's clear that Uncle Ben's car won't be winning many races. Its average speed was less than 8 miles an hour. Let's wrap things up with a look at a mistake often made by Freddie fans. How would you spell the plural of Freddie? F-R-E-D-D-I-E-S, most likely? Nope. As we learn in Freddie Plays Football, more than one Freddie is F-R-E-D-D-Y-S. That is, of course, unless Brooks himself misspelled it. Nah. Importantly, Brooks got almost everything right in the books. That's why we still love them, and they still hold up remarkably well.